So as Laertes gives advice to Ophelia, his sister, here at the start of scene 3, if you had to summate that advice, what is it?
It's good to be scared.
What do you mean by obscure?
Scared. Or like
Scared of what? Because there's definitely that sense of like fear something. But what is it that she's supposed to be afraid of?
I'm not really sure.
Okay, so if we go up towards the top of 35, the beginning of it, we talk about this idea of Hamlet's favor. What does he mean by that? How would we describe that concept of Hamlet's favor? Look at the right-hand side in the red. The notes tell you what it is. If you look at where it says interpretation in red, it literally gives you a summary of that whole part.
Are you asking what's his favorite or what she's supposed to be scared of?
What she's supposed to be scared of. Like that favor is a part of it.
Falling in love.
Yeah. In essence, he's warning his sister. One of the things that we don't understand in this play, much like we said, we don't know what the relationship between these two are because it's never defined. Are they in love with each other? Are they hanging on each other? We don't know. We also don't know exactly what's going on between Hamlet and Ophelia, but we know that it's enough that her brother warns her. You have his favor. He's interested in you. Whether that is flirtation, attention, an actual relationship, we don't know. But he tries to warn her to fear it. And why does he tell her you need to be fearful of Hamlet's attention?
Because he has to marry royalty?
Yes, if we look at line 17, for example, his will is not his own, for he himself is subject to his birth. As a member of the royal family, he can't marry whoever he wants. He's going to have to marry someone to cement a relationship between two countries or for some kind of standing. And so he basically is telling her, like, as we go on, this is line 20, his choice depends on the safety and health of his whole state, and therefore must his choice be circumscribed upon the voice and yielding of that body wherein he is the head. And then we get to what he's really worried about. Yeah, he can't make his own decision, but he says, then if he says he loves you, it fits your wisdom so far to believe it, as he in his particular act and place may give his saying deed. Let's be honest. What is it that men want out of a woman? Animalistic tendency says that men want what? I'll say it. Sex. At the end of the day, what's going to drive it is sex. So he's telling her, hey, if he says he loves you, make him put a ring on it before you do anything. And he's wanting her to fear it. And if we go down a little further, he says, then weigh what loss your honor may sustain if with too credent ear you list his songs, or lose your heart, or your chaste treasure open. They don't give you a definition here for chaste. Chaste refers to virginity. Basically, remember at the time, for a young girl, if she is no longer a virgin, she loses value in a potential marriage. She has lost not just her honor and her dignity, but also that worthiness. And so he's trying to get his sister to fear this. Fear it. And you notice that he just keeps going. This is where he makes it explicit. He keeps coming up with these phrases to make it clear, but we get it. Ophelia returns with some advice of her own for her brother, which is what?
She won't listen to him because she does what he told her not to do.
She says, I will listen to you, but make sure that you follow your own advice too. So you're pretty much there. You know, it's that same thing of, hey, don't be a hypocrite, brother. I know how you are. You make sure you do the same thing. And so he says, oh, fear me not. We continue this fear idea. It's going to be picked up. As we get to 36, we're now going to introduce Polonius. Now, Polonius is going to turn his attention first to his son. His son needs to depart. So what we get from Polonius is this speech that is very famous. Some of these words you may have heard before. It is classic advice from a father to son. But as you look at how it's constructed, pay attention to how this furthers his characterization from the previous scene of him being a guy who just can't shut up. He can't get to the point. So let's continue with it.
I stayed too long. But here my father comes. A double blessing is a double blessing. Occasion smart on the second leave. He's aboard, for shame. The wind sits in the shoulder of your sail as you were stayed for. There. My blessing with thee. And these few precepts in thy memory. See thou correct them. Give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought his act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. The friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel. But do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched, unfledged comrade. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Costly thy habit, as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich, not boy. For the apparel oft proclaims the man, and they in France of the best rank and station are of a most select and generous, chief in that. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true. It must follow, as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell. My blessing season this in thee.
Most humbly do I take my leave, my lord.
The time invites you. Go, your servants tend.
Farewell, Ophelia. And remember well what I have said to you.
'Tis in my memory locked, and you yourself shall keep the key of it.
Farewell.
Okay. Let's cut it there. We now move Laertes off as he leaves, and he will not return until Act 4. He's gone. But let's pay attention to sort of how Polonius addresses his son. Again, this is a famous bit of the play as he comes in. What are some of the things that you take note of in the advice that he gives his son? Like, what's a good piece of advice you see in what Polonius says? All right, well, let's take a look at a few. So if we start with like line 62, he says, those friends thou hast and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel. Hey, keep your friends really close. You know, connect them to yourself with hoops of steel. Is that good advice? Hopefully you think that it's important to keep your friends close. I don't know. Then we go down to like line 65. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, a fight. But being in, bear that the opposed may beware of thee. Hey, don't get into a fight, but if you do get into a fight, whip him. All right, that's pretty solid evidence. You know, give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Listen to your friends, but don't be willing to spew your business everywhere. Take each man's censor, but reserve thy judgment. He gives the advice of neither a borrower nor a lender be. Don't borrow money. Don't be giving money to everybody. Everything that's here that he says is good, solid advice that likely you will hear before you go to college from either your parents or people that are close to you. Let's talk about the central irony of this whole speech, though. Look how it begins. As Polonius comes in, what is he very aware of? He says, yet here, Laertes, aboard, for shame. The wind sits in the shoulder of your sail and you're stayed for. He said, what are you still here for? Shame on you. Like, you're late. You need to be going. So he acknowledges, hey, man, you got to get going. And then he goes, but before you go, let me give you some advice. And then he goes on this whole speech. So if we look at the way that he's just this old blowhard, it's like your parents saying, hey, you're late for school. But before you go to school, let's have a 15-minute conversation about why homework is really important. And you're like, oh my God, like I'm supposed to leave. Come on. You just said that. It helps to support Polonius's characterization. This is one of the few times that he is an honest and genuine character in what he says rather than just being this blowhard. Now, we've moved him off. We've moved Laertes off. But notice that as he leaves, he once again acknowledges to his sister really quickly, hey, don't forget what I said. If you have a father who's a busybody, what do you think the next line is going to be out of Polonius's mouth? So if Laertes turned to Ophelia before he leaves and says, hey, don't forget what we were talking about, and he's just listening in, what do you think his first question to Ophelia is going to be?
What did he say to you?
Yeah, what did he say to you? This is going to help us to see that he is that busybody. He's going to dig. It's also going to help us to understand Ophelia a little bit here. Remember, the majority of the talking has been done by the men, not by her. And we're going to notice in this scene that her characterization is going to come through in how her father speaks to her and how she reacts here. And so we're going to go all the way to the end of the scene. It is not very far. It goes just to the top of the page after on 38. And then we're going to talk about what we see. I'm going to give you kind of a minute once we finish to sort of look back and see what you take note of and how Polonius treats his daughter.
What is it, Ophelia, he hath said to you?
So please you, something touching the Lord Hamlet.
Married well before. 'Tis told me he hath very oft of late given private time to you, and you yourself have of your audience been most free and bounteous. If it be so, as so 'tis put on me, and that in way of caution, I must tell you, you do not understand yourself so clearly as it behoves my daughter and your honor. What is between you? Give me up the truth.
He hath, my lord, of late made many tenders of his affection to me.
Affection, go. You speak like a queen girl, unsifted in such perilous circumstances. Do you believe his tenders, as you call them?
I do not know, my lord, what I should think.
Well, Mary, I'll teach you. Think yourself a baby that you obtain his tenders for true pay which are not sterling. Tender yourself more dearly, or not to crack the wind of the poor phrase, running it thus, you tender me a fool.
My lord, he hath importuned me with love in honourable fashion,
Aye, fashion you may call it, goat.
and hath given countenance to his speech, my lord, with almost all the holy vows of heaven.
Aye, springes to catch woodcocks. I do know when the blood burns how prodigal the soul lends the tongue vows. These blazes, daughter, giving more light than heat, extincting both, even in their promise as it is a making, you must not take for fire. From this time be somewhat scandal of your maiden presence. Set your entreatment at a higher rate than a command of parley. For Lord Hamlet believes so much in him that he is young, and with a larger tether may he walk than may be given you. In few, Ophelia, do not believe his vows, for they are brokers, not of the dye which their investments show, but mere implorators of unholy suits, breathing like sanctified and pious bawds, the better to beguile. This is for all. I would not in plain terms from this time forth have you so slander any moment leisure as to give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet. Look to it, I charge you. Come your ways.
I shall obey.
Okay, take a minute or so to kind of look back here and see what you notice about this speech between father and daughter, and especially how they're put together. Pay attention to the red text. All right, we ready? I want to start by talking about one word that comes up a number of times here in this conversation back and forth between the two, and it's the word tender. Do you know multiple definitions of the word?
Relax,
Huh? Go
like
ahead.
soft and like a caretaker or something.
Okay. Do you know any other definitions? Time to use the God machine. Pull your phone out, or if you have something there, and just look it up. Tender definitions and see what comes up. If there are any other definitions that we should be aware of, because they use it a lot of different ways here. It's not always referring to the same thing.
Sensitive?
Okay, so that could go here with our caring, sensitive.
Young.
Huh?
Young.
Young. Any other definitions?
Money.
Money. What does it say about money?
It says often to carry out work, supply goods, or buy land.
Yeah. Anything else? It's okay if not. Don't feel like we gotta scramble. So notice that we have some that seem to go together here. This idea of something being tender to the touch, the tactile quality of it has a softness. We know that tender can sometimes talk about the way we relate or emote, that it has a caring, sensitive quality. Someone who is tender, often has that loving, nurturing, comforting quality to them. We could talk about it as young. And then this money part, if you've ever seen a cash register, especially an old one, you might notice that instead of saying amount due, it might say tender due. And so it relates to a type of money. And it's not specific. It's not like tenders were like the old word for dollars. No. We're going to notice that a lot of these are used as we go throughout. So if we go to the beginning here and we start to look at what they're saying, notice that about line 99, as her father is questioning her, he says, he hath my lord of late made many tenders of his affection to me. Well, which definition are we probably referring to here? The second one. We're here on this way of he's being nice. He's being open. But notice how Polonius introduces it. If we go back up to line 96, imagine that when your father said, hey, what was your brother talking to you about? And it was like something about Hamlet. And the first thing that your dad says is, I must tell you, you do not understand yourself so clearly. Wow, what's that say about the way your dad treats you and views you? Are you going to want to tell him more? No, but then she does. Oh, he's treated me tenderly. And he turns, by the time we get to line 101, affection, puh, you speak like a green girl. And we have that definition for inexperienced, unsifted in such perilous circumstances. He's basically saying, first, you don't know yourself. And now he's like, you speak like an idiot. And then he asks her again, do you believe his tenders, as you call them? Are we still talking about this same definition here? We're still referring to that. And she's like, I don't know, my lord, what I should think. Well, after your father told you, hey, you don't know yourself very well, and then said you speak like an idiot, could you understand where this girl would be like, I guess I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. Does that tell her that she's very strong as a person? No, and we need to understand that going forward. Ophelia is under her father's thumb. She's a young girl, but she's definitely intimidated. She doesn't have that strength of person. And so look at how Polonius then reacts to her when she's like, well, I guess I don't know. He says, Mary, I will teach you. Think yourself a baby that you've taken these tenders for true pay. So first, let's talk about the way he introduces it. He's like, oh, you don't know? Then you listen to me like you're a baby. You're roughly the same age Ophelia is. If your father came at you and said, God, you don't know yourself? You speak like an idiot? Think of yourself as a baby. Would you want to continue this conversation with your dad? I would hope not. And I would hope that your dad wouldn't approach you in that way. He would kind of approach you as the adult that you really are. But here we get a very good way of looking at their relationship. And notice that this line, 106, is where we change our definition of tender. Because now when we say tender, we're still talking here, but which definition are we starting to move towards? Because he says, take these tenders as true pay, money. He says, they're not sterling. And if you look at the side, it says real money. And now we're going, okay, I got it. Don't take them as money. He says, tender yourself more dearly. Now look over at the side and look at how that line is defined. Offer yourself at a higher rate, or you'll turn into a fool. Tender yourself more dearly, or you'll tender me a fool. Think about how he views his daughter. Remember what her brother said. Fear what Hamlet is going to tell you because you might lose your chaste treasure, your value. But he put it in terms of her chastity, your virginity, your honor. But look at what her father is saying. It's all about sterling. It's all about money. He doesn't view her necessarily as being honorable as much as You're my daughter. I can marry you off to somebody. You don't lose that value. This isn't about her. It's about what she can be worth to him. Does that make sense? And you notice that continues as you go down. Now, we'd said, we don't expect that Ophelia would continue to talk, and yet she does. My lord, he hath importuned me with love in honorable fashion. She's trying to argue with her dad, who told her already, hey, you don't know anything and you're stupid. And she goes, but he said really nice things to me, and he really means them. Oh my God, do you think he's going to listen? Of course not. And he goes on this whole thing where he's like, and you actually gave, and she's like, and he actually meant it. And she says, oh God. And so the rest of the speech gets into, you fell for it. You better watch out, girl. And I want to point your attention to one line. Look at line 121. And I want you to think about how we can reword line 121 into a more modern English. Polonius's father tells his daughter to be more scant of your maiden presence. Be somewhat scanter of your maiden presence. How would you reword that to say that today in a way that would make sense to you?
I don't know what scanty means.
Okay, so if we look at maiden presence, how would you describe that? How would we reword that part? Okay, let's just focus on maiden. Maiden kind of goes with chastity. To describe someone as a maid or their maidenhood, you're talking about their youthful, innocent, virginal qualities. So if we're talking about her maiden presence, consider this idea of how she portrays herself out there as a young woman. Based on the way that he's talked so far, would he want her to be more outgoing in her approach as a young woman or less outgoing? Less. So if we're looking at scanter, less. This would be the modern equivalent of your dad sitting you down and you're like, Dad, he goes, what were you and your brother talking about? And you're like, well, he was telling me to stay away from this boy. And he's like, excuse me, boy? And you're like, yeah, he really likes me. And you're like, oh my God, you're an idiot. That boy doesn't like you. He just wants what he can get from you. And then he ends this conversation by saying, hey, be somewhat scanter of your maiden presence. In other words, how about you stop flirting with him and acting like that? How about you dress a little bit more properly? How about you stop hanging around with him? Wow. I'm going to be a little more harsh in how he might even say it based on that idea of maiden presence, because I want you to see how this line should be taken. It would be like your dad saying, I want you to stop dressing like such a whore. This isn't one of those speeches where Polonius is holding her hand and going, sweetie, I know you think he loves you, but he really doesn't. He's really looking at this in terms of, girl, you're going to cost me some money here. Your worth is going to diminish if you screw this up. How about you stop being that way? And look at how this scene ends. By the time we get to the last line of this scene, notice that it's complete submission. This girl has tried to argue, she's tried to make her point, but she understands her place in it. And so she simply wraps up by saying, yes, sir. Dang. We've got to remember that she is the more traditional young woman. We, in a modern audience, want that girl that's going to buck. We want that girl that's going to stand up for herself and say nay. But that's not what tradition tells us existed. And so it's important to kind of see that this is who we're getting. Ophelia is this girl that's under her father's influence. And it's important because as we end this scene, he's told her, hey, stay away from that boy. And she said yes. It's going to be important as we get to Act 2. And we'll get there next week. We are done with Polonius and Ophelia for Act 1. And as we move here into Scene 4, you notice that Scene 4 returns us to the setting of Scene 1. We are back on the platform of the watch. It is near midnight. But we've now added Hamlet to this group that is out there. He said that he wants to see what shows up. We're going to do a little bit of creative skipping because it really doesn't matter. If we take a look at what is early here, the first 6 lines of this simply tell us, wow, it's cold out here. You sure is this where you saw the ghost? Is this about the right time? And then as we go past it, we hear on, between 6 and 7, that flourish of trumpets and 2 pieces going off. Pieces would be cannons. Remember that we talked earlier about when they give a toast in Denmark, they set off cannons. As these guys are waiting outside for this potential ghost, everybody else is in the castle partying it up. Yeah. And so Hamlet here goes into this speech towards the bottom of the page where he criticizes Claudius's drinking. He again laments on the fact that it's like, oh, this is just, these people, all they do is they have parties and they do this, but you know what? All I want is to be able to mourn my father. And then if you look at 39, right after Hamlet finishes talking, woo, here comes the ghost again. It shows up. And so, yeah, let's just look really quick at what we have here. I'm going to read Hamlet's lines. He says, angels and ministers of grace, defend us. Be thou a spirit of health or goblin dam. Bring with thee heirs from heaven or blasts from hell. Be thy intents wicked or charitable. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. I call thee Hamlet, king, father, royal Dane. Oh, answer me. Let me not burst in ignorance, but tell why thy canonized bones, hearsed in death, have burst their cerements. Why the sepulchre wherein we saw thee quietly inert have opened its ponderous and marble jaws to cast thee up again. What may this mean that thou, dead corse, again in complete steel, revisits thus the glimpses of the moon, making night hideous, and we, fools of nature, so horridly to shake our disposition with thoughts beyond the reaches of our souls? Say, why is this? Wherefore? What should we do? This is all high speech, but you get all he's doing is, why are you here? What do we want to know? It's beautiful in construction, but you're just like, it's laborious. Notice that the ghost beckons. Whether it's a finger wag, whether it's a hand, in some way, this is the first acknowledgement that the ghost has made to anyone. And it is calling Hamlet away. If we look at what happens here in the rest of this, Marcellus and Horatio are like, dude, you can't go with him. And Hamlet draws a sword on them and says, I will make a ghost of any of you that try to stop me. I'm going. And as Hamlet is led off by this ghost, we have the famous line uttered by Marcellus, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. The ghost is leading Hamlet off for what we have here in scene 5. This is the final scene of Act 1, and I want you to read this for next Monday. Scene 5 is Hamlet's moment with the ghost. As they speak and talk, why the ghost is here will be revealed. What we need to know will be revealed, and we get that kick and that call to action. Hamlet will know now what he needs to do to set right the kingdom of Denmark. On Monday, what we're going to do is to view different versions of this scene from different movies. So rather than read anymore, we're going to revisit this scene and we're going to talk about interpretation. And so my suggestions to you in terms of reading, hey, don't be afraid to use the audio. It's linked from day one. It's been linked all week. And when you go in, if you didn't notice, the first comment on the video has timestamps for where you can go for each act and scene. So it's really easy to find. Don't be afraid to use the SparkNotes version, the No Fear. If you're really having trouble following along with the play, the No Fear will give you the original text right next to a modified, more modern text. So it's easier to follow. We want to see what we can do with this as we come back Monday, and then we're really going to talk about interpretation. Tomorrow we're going to do some poetry, and so remember that poetry assignment is due. Yeah, if you want to